Good morning, Lucy.
Good morning.
Hi. How's Brussels this morning?
Brussels is wonderful this morning. It's very hot, thank you, and a busy diplomatic week with Joe Biden now concluding his visit to Europe with, of course, that much-anticipated meeting in Geneva with his Russian counterpart, President Vladimir Putin.
Right, now let's get straight into it now. U.S. President, as you've mentioned, just met with European leaders in Brussels yesterday. What was the main takeaway from the meeting?
The main takeaway was really about achieving a reset in transatlantic relations after those very difficult years for the transatlantic relationship under former President Trump, a four-year period that saw a tit-for-tat trade war, that saw an undermining of multilateral organizations, such as that EU-US relationship, such as the UN, such as NATO, so very significantly. So this meeting was really about identifying areas where the two sides want to re-strengthen cooperation. Much of the focus was about trade relations, clearing away and resolving the trade disputes, some of which far preceded Donald Trump, but some of which escalated under his leadership. Climate change was also on the agenda. China was very much looming over the discussions, how to boost those areas of transatlantic cooperation in terms of things like digital regulation, in terms of responding to the rise of Beijing. But palpable relief from both sides yesterday following the meeting to have that reset in relations in order to be able to look outside of the West in terms of confronting some geopolitical challenges.
Right. Now, former President Donald Trump had put in place tariffs on selected goods from the EU bloc. Did the parties agree to lift these tariffs as they are discussing that reset?
Yes, there was an agreement really to look for a resolution on this by December. The EU has given Washington until December to remove any Trump-era duties. And for its part, it will be removing tariffs on steel and aluminium for the next 6 months whilst a deal is thrashed out on that. But significantly, there was a deal on that long-running Boeing-Airbus dispute on airline subsidies. That has led to, over the last 17 years, the imposition of tariffs on some 11.5 billion in exports on both sides. So this is a costly and long-running trade dispute. Negotiating teams here in Brussels from the EU and the United States have been thrashing out the terms of a deal overnight in frenetic talks here in Brussels, and they were able to reach a deal. This is a 5-year peace deal that will see the lifting of tariffs on airline subsidies for the next 5 years, and the terms set out in terms of what state subsidies for airlines are acceptable. So that is a very significant breakthrough.
Indeed. Now, the relationship between the EU and the USA has been strained the past 4 years. Were assurances made on both sides on getting back to the pre-Trump era in terms of this relationship going forward?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, there were a number of areas where the EU and the US have pledged to work together. There's been the establishment of a new joint trade and tech council, which will boost dialogue between the two sides. And again, this is very much about looking to Beijing, the rise of China and its growing influence in particularly the digital industry. So this is about identifying areas where the two sides can boost their cooperation on digital regulation, for example, which we know has been a priority for both sides, and that's looking at things like intricate digital supply chains, many of which run through China. We'll be looking at joint collective acquisitions. So that is a significant strategic announcement, boosting dialogue on that. There will also be renewed cooperation on climate change. Again, a renewed commitment to have dialogue on that to ensure that the other meets its 2030 targets as well as 2050 targets, and encourage other countries such as Russia and China to boost their investment in green industries and up their climate commitments. There is also a renewed cooperation to work together on the COVID-19 pandemic, namely helping the developing world boost its vaccine and COVID-19 treatment manufacturing capacity, as well as calling for a full and transparent investigation into the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic and that lab leak theory in Wuhan.
Right. Now, it is not a secret that the relationship between Russia and the United States has been strained for decades. What are some of the expectations about meeting Putin today in Geneva?
Well, expectations are pretty low. I think it's safe to say for this meeting we're not expecting any breakthrough. It's no secret, as you say, that relations between Washington and Moscow have been at a very low ebb since 2014, but nonetheless we are hearing from both sides that there is a commitment to what's being described as strategic stability, and I think that is the best possible outcome that we can expect from today's meeting. Certainly from the US's side, there is no end really of issues to raise. Ukraine, Syria, arms proliferation, cyber hacking amongst them, and particularly the poisoning and treatment of opposition leader Alexei Navalny. And Vladimir Putin has made it very, very clear that he perceived this to be an internal affair. He sees this as an example of America trying to lead Russia and meddle in its internal affairs. So we are expecting some slight loggerheads on those issues, but nonetheless it is being perceived as a diplomatic win really on both sides. Russia to have secured a meeting with Joe Biden so early in his presidency, certainly that is playing as a victory in Moscow, something Washington has been keen to downplay, but Biden is saying that really this is about making sure that dialogue is kept up with Moscow and that he is able to have very frank discussions with Putin and let him know what he wants him to know, to quote Biden himself.
Right now, this meeting, I know former U.S. President Donald Trump had what could be said a cozy relationship with a Russian leader. Now, with this meeting taking place, do you expect Biden to revert to a more hostile and adversarial relationship with Putin?
Well, I think that's right about the cozy relationship between Trump and Putin. Of course, some eyebrows raised about what exactly Putin's influence was over Trump. This relationship will be very different indeed. I mean, Biden significantly described Putin in March as a killer. But nonetheless, this is about this sort of two-track approach from the White House to Moscow, which is at once about defense, but it's also about meaningful dialogue. This is about ensuring that relations are kept at this level of stability, but this is not expected to be a friendly meeting. Biden is expected to raise all of those difficult issues, and notably there is no joint press conference after the meeting. Biden will be speaking alone, and we will get a sense of how much he was able to gain ground on some of those very difficult and controversial issues.
Yeah, some of the issues are with regards to U.S. citizens who are imprisoned in Russia. Now, Russia has said it is willing to release some of them, apart from Paul Whelan, a former U.S. Marine who was convicted by a Moscow court of espionage on June 15, 2020, and sentenced to 16 years in prison. Do you think Biden will force the matter?
Well, certainly Paul Whelan has made it known that he hopes Biden will raise his case during this meeting. We had an audio recording released by his family earlier on this week, appealing for an end of what he described as hostage diplomacy. Biden is expected to raise the matter, but again, whether or not Putin perceives this to be another example of meddling by the US in Russian affairs, which seems likely. But Paul Whelan looking at a very long prison sentence, and of course other US prisoners being held in Moscow, and certainly that will be cause for discussions during the meeting. But again, we are not expecting any significant breakthrough on this, given Putin's messaging about US meddling in internal affairs.
Right. Now, on to NATO. What was the main takeaway from the NATO summit?
I think the most significant takeaway from the NATO summit was a shift away from a focus on Russia, which nonetheless made up a significant portion of the discussion, was criticised for its aggressive tactics, but a really significant acknowledgement for the very first time about the security risk posed by China, who was described as a posing systemic challenges to the NATO alliance, particularly when it comes to cyber warfare. There was a talk of a need for investment and modernization of NATO's defense capabilities, particularly in terms of cyber terrorism, in order to cope with the threats, not just from Russia now, but from Beijing as well. There was very much a sense that America was back in the room, that there was palpable relief from the 30 allied leaders as they met at NATO headquarters to have a friend back in the White House who was committed to multilateralism, who wanted to take up once again a leadership role in the NATO alliance. But some difficult discussions about Afghanistan, again about the common budget of NATO, with the US still paying, of course, the large majority into NATO's common budget, and a feeling perhaps that European defence capabilities are underfunded compared to that of the United States, and some resistance on that from countries like France, who feel they don't want to be significantly increasing their defence budgets at this point. So, but nonetheless, very much a positive tone coming out of that meeting, but a significant shift with China for the first time recognised as a security risk, albeit in a different category to Russia.
Right, interesting. Now, finally, Lucy, climate change was also a big talking point at this year's gathering. What was the consensus on tackling the climate change issue?
Again, climate change was acknowledged for the first time by NATO allies in a very substantial joint communique that was just issued after the meeting, some more than 70 points. There is an awareness that climate change poses a very real threat to NATO's operations, to its infrastructure around the world, and to its personnel in places like the Arctic, in Africa. So there has been a commitment to boost its green infrastructure, to make investments in that area, and for NATO really to be a leader in terms of multilateral organizations, in terms of setting an example of what a commitment to climate change and green investment looks like for an international body such as NATO.
Right, Lucy, thank you so much for coming through.